least a virtual flag here?
I do.
Okay. Perfect.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, so item 2 is a roll call. Commissioner Beresny,
Yep, here.
Commissioner Kirshen,
Here.
Commissioners Helen and DeLarge are not here.
Okay, we have any call to the public? No, no one addressing us, okay. The approval of the May 5th minutes, so since we don't have a quorum, which would probably be 50% plus one, we can't approve these minutes, so we'll have to move that approval of the, oh, I'm looking at the June agenda here. Approval of last, I've got it somewhere.
That's the agenda.
So move the approval of last month's minutes to our next meeting. So, next thing is to continue the review of the high-level diagram. So what I did, and what we did last week, and I just want to kind of recap that. And what this will do is tell us in this overall process where we have holes. Okay, and so I'll go through, you know, I did an analysis when we went through last month, through each page in the workflow that Jeremy presented, kind of marked down where it belongs. So just to recap, the ballot process went from, and I'm looking at our block diagram here, from voter roll to the voting blocks. Polling setup was all within 3, which are voting. Voter checking process within 3 are voting. The closing in the voting block. Receiving station ballot transport, it goes from voting to tabulation. So these are the same day ballots. Are voted on with a ballot generated from an e-poll book. Signatures, voter ID has been verified, identification has been verified. They don't have to go through verification. Early ballot processing, which is in verification, that's the recorder's office. Early processing goes from the verification from the recorder's office into tabulation. Duplication we have sitting within tabulation. Provisional and conditional ballots, we've got it going from the voting block, from same day elections up to verification in the recorder's office. And then the tabulation, which was page 12, we go from tabulation to results in canvas. Is that what you remember, Martha?
Well, I don't really remember it all, but
Yeah. So I don't see anything that in the updates for the flow charts that would say anything else, so.
Tom, the only other thing that I might add to the early ballot with regard to recorders is they have, and I think it needs to be on here, and that is if there is a voter that's sent me a mail-in ballot but also showed up on election day, you know, with the new law, even if they were sent a mail-in ballot, they don't have to surrender it at the ballot center, and they no longer need to fill out a provisional ballot. They just automatically give them one. So if the recorder receives a mail-in ballot from a voter, it's supposed to be forwarded to the attorney, county attorney for potential.
So was that voted in by the legislature this year?
That was
approved?
last year. It was between the primary and the general where the provisional issue changed.
So, yeah, first off, with like the public comment in the meeting, I know we talked about that with the attorney last time. So outside of the public comment, are we not going to have that as part of the meeting? I know this is a smaller group, so we can go back and forth, but just to clarify.
That's fine. I apologize. I was out of line.
Let me see something here. Let me look at the bylaws for the EIC. The EIC may create this committee, ad hoc committees to assist in providing advice to the entire commission. Non-members, this is in Article 8 of the committee, under the EIC bylaws, may serve on ad hoc committees.
Okay.
Okay, so I think the interaction that we're having right now with Mr. Locks, even though we've never had that approved by Mr. Bickle, as the chair, this could be viewed by some as input from non-members of the EIC being on an ad hoc committee.
Okay. You are the chair of the committee, so if that is what we are going with, right now, and we can get clarification, I guess, on,
Yeah, there's
that going forward, but
For now,
Okay.
I'll just keep my mouth shut. How's that? And that way,
it's,
all I'm trying to do is to improve things here and make them more transparent.
I understand. In response to that, though, yes, the law was clarified, for that process to take place. It doesn't, as far as the actual practice of voting, change anything. If you had already turned in your ballot and you go vote, it's going to register that, so the person would have to vote a provisional, just like any other reason you would vote a provisional ballot.
Also, they wouldn't have to surrender
You don't necessarily have to. The e-poll book will alert the poll worker if that person has turned in a ballot. So if you got your early ballot, you left it at home, and you just show up, it's going to show you that you can vote a regular ballot. That was the change to this one.
so that it would have to be caught. So the provisional ballot, so let's say I left it at home,
Your early ballot.
the early ballot at home, you vote a provisional, and the voter slips the mail-in ballot.
Mhm. The recorder's office will not look at those earlies until they have gotten the list from us of who voted on election night. So at that point, when they saw that early ballot come through, they see that you already voted on election day, they reject the early.
Okay. So that was just a recap in that, so, on the block diagram. So we can go to the next item, which is, again, item 5B. And these were the changes that we made.
Yes.
The flow charts. So I went through I did a comparison, and I didn't go a word-to-word comparison. I just kind of looked at the block flows, and I saw changes on 3 pages. On page
that's
2, on page 7, and on page 13.
Okay.
Is that what you got?
Yes, that sounds right. I didn't mark them on the pages, but yeah, so the change on page 2 was adding something about the logic and accuracy tests to the initial ballot creation process. So those little 3 boxes to the side, on that one is basically just a summary of the LNA process to indicate that it is happening during that point.
Yep. Yeah, that's what I saw in the difference between the two also.
Right, because of course for a state or federal election, those are conducted by the Secretary of State in addition to the ones that we hold at the county level.
Yep. So the next one was on page 7. Which is the voter center closing. Process. So I think the big change was down there about, right just past the middle of the page where you had the arrows going down from those 4 boxes to the 1 box.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the only change you made on this?
I think so. I'm trying to remember. Did I bring my old notes? I believe that was it, yes.
Yeah, without reading in the verbiage, that was the only thing that stood out to me that changed on there.
Yes. So it should just be more clear about this process, where everything is going.
Yeah. One thing I want to say, and I was thinking about that this morning, can we number these pages?
We can.
Yeah.
It's a little tricky because I'm doing it in Visio and then making it in PDF, so and then every single time I gotta go back to Visio and then redo it. So I just hadn't done it yet, but
Last one was on the last page, tabulation. And that change was, I think, right in the middle of the page, we moved these, it seems to be the 2 blocks, and then it goes down to 1.
yeah, this was the one.
On the right-hand side, on the current one, you have that one big block, it goes down to 2 different ones.
Yes.
You have a split.
Yes, the big issue with this one was the arrows going every which way.
Mhm.
So I found by flipping those boxes, it makes it a little more straightforward. You still got some arrows crossing, but I think it's a little easier to follow on this.
Okay, so is there any verbiage change anywhere?
No, not on this page.
Besides that, on any of the pages?
There was, I'm looking back through to see where I feel like there was one other change I made, but I need to find it.
One thing that's always helped me, Jeremy, when you're changing a draft document like this and you're going from version X.1 to X.2, which is basically what we're doing right now, you always kind of do a record of changes and what prompted the change.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always kind of good just to write that stuff down.
I didn't, now that I'm remembering it now. So one of the things that we had talked about last time about adding to this was the contingency plan. As I was going through it,
Yeah,
yes,
for power.
I don't see a spot to put that works for what this document is. We have other documents, some that we're making right now to clarify with security plans, with contingency plans for various different things.
Right.
We have so many different contingency plans for different things, and if you start doing it just on election day, well, what about after the fact? What about before the fact? And I didn't
Right.
feel like there was any spot in here that putting a contingency plan
Yeah, and so.
Worked.
From the elections department standpoint, what we don't have in here is doing the training for the election workers,
Right.
you know, because that's got to be plugged in somewhere, you know, and I think what's also good now that we've got this, I think pretty much complete from this first go-round is a timeline.
Okay.
So you work backwards. You start when, okay, here's the cutoff date that the canvassed certified election goes from the county to the Secretary of State's office. Then you know, so you've got all of that time in there where you're still doing signature verification and tabulation and all that that stuff. We've got election day, you know, the recorder gives the early voting and the mail-in voting, we have those dates. But before that, and I think back to last year, when we were bringing on the e-poll books, and there was a lack of an oversight or whatever, having a project manager for the implementation of the e-poll books in the elections department.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but using I think the comments were basically using the project manager at that time. And I'm kind of thinking about what some of the other commissioners said during the EIC meetings. You know, that in itself would never fly. I know in the federal government when I did programming, project implementation, and systems implementation, you're never gonna rely on the contractor to run the show for you. You know, you should be running the show yourself. And then it could all the way even go back to present day, because you're probably working on your elections handbook, poll worker handbook.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you are or not.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a continuous.
It's a continuous process. And so you really highlight, you know, those processes you're doing. You're gonna have to have dates, how long is the trades to do election worker training, you know, how long is the training gonna be, and so those fit into the project plan, or what we call the Gantt chart, or time to, you know, do that kind of backward planning, and just have it you ever see, you know what a Gantt chart is?
No.
Okay, so. You basically have elements of a Gantt chart here in these flow charts. Because you gotta go, okay, so let's say this is from the recorder's office. So you got a milestone on here, 28 days. That's the last day before a general election that somebody can register to vote
Mm-hmm.
legally, right? So that's a milestone. Okay, on a timeline. So all of this time you got coming up here, we've constantly got voter registration going on. And we got what I'm gonna call database maintenance. Because we should be updating the database, putting in the new voters, cleaning the voter registration database to take out things that are no longer pertinent. So, and then, so that's 28 days, and then that triggers what? You got these voter rolls, then you have to go to print, right?
Well, yeah, I guess, so there are different schedules, and timelines. The Secretary of State publishes one, for every election cycle, basically. Our office does something that we put out on our website.
Okay.
Shortly before. So as far as this is the date when this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens.
Okay.
It changes with every election, of course.
Sure.
But many of the dates are, 2 weeks, the 28, 29 days before registration cutoff, those kind of things. So there are certain dates. The ballots and everything are prepared before that, because early voting starts right after that. So we've already prepared all of that. A lot of, for us as an elections department, voter registration is almost not even, it's its own thing. Because people register to vote all the time. It's not part of the actual elections.
But it's part of the
process.
electoral process.
It is,
Which
but
what
it,
I know the arguments back and forth, but it is part of the electoral process. It's under Title 16 of the Arizona Revised Statutes, the voter registration.
it is.
So
But it's for us, as far
for
as
the elections department,
starting
it's-
dates, it's difficult.
right.
For us, as far as the dates when things start, is really candidate qualifying. Once that process starts, candidates are qualifying, people are submitting stuff to us to go on the ballot, ballots are created. That's kind of how we do. Voter registration is something that happens independently of that. I mean, that's, people are registering to vote and then they vote.
Right, but we still have, you know, the process where, part of the electoral process is candidates and getting themselves on the ballots and what they have to do. I mean, all of that's covered in you know, we didn't necessarily add it in by number on the definition for the electoral process. That's all part of it also, and I even think, you know, Director Hargrove brought it up, you know, she even brought it up in one of the EIC meetings, is that's part of the process also.
It is, and that's where I think we sort of start the process with the initial ballot creation. That's our starting point.
Yeah, for your nuts and bolts stuff, that is, and it runs through same day, and then tabulation, and then the canvas. Okay, so I'm trying to think of what we don't have included in here, and I mean, the big glaring one is, if you look at the block diagram, and then if you look at page one of this, the top three blocks are all recorder's office. And in the block diagram for registration voter rolls, we've got nothing in there. It's
Yeah.
totally blank. You know, and I understand that the arguments back and forth, required versus requesting. So, you know, and the recorder's office had input into this, right? Into these things up here?
I did, yeah, I ran a few of them by them to get some clarification on certain parts with
Okay.
the early ballot processing, provisionals, things like that, that we work in conjunction with them to do. But the other issue, I mean, registration is that's 100%, you know,
Right.
their baby, so
I know.
And, I mean, a lot of the other stuff, I think what this does is give a pretty good explanation of the process, especially kind of from the public viewpoint. There's a lot of other things, you know, internally in our office. We're checking out different vote centers, making sure things are good, poll worker training, like you mentioned. There's a lot of, you know, behind the scenes stuff that goes into an election, of course, that I don't think is necessarily here. It's more of just general overview with our department and what we do.
So, Arthur, is there anything glaring is there anything you see that's a glaring omission in any of these flow charts? Basically, this is much better than what we had a few months ago when we had basically a document that we found from 2019 that was outdated.
Yeah, and I mean, this, a lot of this was kind of building on that, so I want to,
And it was.
and I think, honestly, we could probably cut some of this that just gets into the nuts and bolts of election day voting. But
But for the public, and if the EIC is supposed to be here to review forces and the betterment of, betterment of the public trust, and, you know, there are times when more details are better. Because, you know, openness and transparency, you know, we see these buzzwords all the time. And when a public entity is not willing to, you know, show that the emperor has no clothes, or they pull back the curtain where the Wizard of Oz is handling all the controls, you know, then that's a good thing, you know, and so to me, more detail is probably better.
No, and I mean, I think that this gives a pretty detailed explanation of what happens, especially on our end through election day. There's obviously the caveat that sometimes things do go wrong. There are, you know, issues that you just can't account for every single thing. Every
Yes.
day is different.
So I'm wondering what changes in when the Secretary of State's elections manual comes up for approval, then there's gonna be some tweaking to this.
Yeah, I don't know that the EPM, the new guidelines, are gonna fundamentally change anything about what we're doing.
Yeah.
There are.
But it's possible.
There's always some things that may change,
Yeah, 'cause
regarding our
one of the
processes.
one of the things I read in an article is, there's been talk of doing away with certification of equipment. There was talk of really taking out a lot of, the signature verification you see in 16-551.
Mhm.
So for the electoral process, that's those are major things that could change this. There may be stipulations on drop boxes.
Yeah.
I think the signature verification thing is, it's basically, from what I read from this article, is that, and what they've looked at is letting each recorder figure out their own way of doing it without taking the guidelines that we have in state statute, which is scary for me.
But
anyways.
yeah, I mean, it's obviously a recorder's issue, but there's a lot of stuff legislatively that can change with elections. As we know, it's a hot topic,
and so we've been following the legislative stuff. Most of the stuff, elections or electoral process related, was the stuff that was passed by the legislature was vetoed by the governor. So there's probably not going to be a whole lot of changes in state statute.
mm-hmm.
So that elections manual from the Secretary of State's office is going to be key on the current interpretation of state statute. That's basically what it is.
So I know that we're now referring to the early voters as the active early voting list.
Mm-hmm.
There was a time when they were called the permanent early voting list. Was that a change in state statute?
I believe it was, I think, election cycle before this current cycle, but I think relatively recently. So it is officially called the active early voting list now. So, yeah, and obviously, our processes change with statute. If something, a law passes, we abide by it. So, like you said, a lot of the ones that were passed this session were vetoed. But of course, we're watching them, and if anything happens, then if the governor would have signed them into law, some of the things in here may have changed. So,
Well, just changing the name of something doesn't actually change anything significant, other than maybe there was you have to reaffirm that you want to be on the active early voting list periodically or something like
and
that.
I think there were a couple bills, again, they're recorders things, so I didn't pay that much attention to those, but there were a couple bills dealing with the list and things of that regard. I don't know what the end result of all of those were, but.
Right, the signature verification process has definitely been a topic on several different radio programs.
Well,
Nationally, they were
So-
talking about
so-
things in Maricopa County.
So,
Yeah.
And we're gonna talk about that in the that new procurement that the recorder's office has made, approved by the Board of Supervisors. And I don't wanna discuss it now, but, there were a couple of things that I read in the contract and some of the backup material that really tweaked my interest, so I will, Vanessa, I'll send you a link, because I brought that up for the agenda in 2 weeks. The contract that the Board of Supervisors approved a week ago, or whatever it was. So we can take a review of that during that portion of, on the agenda for the next DIC meeting. And so I got that article that I want to send you with that thing that I want to add along with that background material for this too. Okay, so, right now, we can't really vote on anything. I don't think there's much right at the present time that we could add in here. So, I'm recommending that we do not meet in August, because I was not gonna be here the first week of August anyways. And so we hold our next meeting on the first Friday in September. And then we can make sure that after a closer review of all this stuff, because I'm gonna make some notes, because what I like to do, and what I always did in this kind of stuff is, you take something in a flow chart and say, okay, is it covered in state statute, is it covered in a manual, what is the defining document where you pull this data from? So, is there something in state statute, or is there something in your elections manual that you used the last time, where you can pull that back, that information, and just kind of like key it in on each block that's in here, so we have a reference document for where that flow is. And that's a standard kind of thing we do in this process development. Okay, where did I get this from?
Okay. Yeah, I think we can definitely do that, especially for the big points.
Yeah, so,
Maybe not necessarily every block, but definitely the big points, what section is talking about the LNA? What section is talking about,
yeah, some of the election day setup stuff, it's probably not done.
not, a lot of that is
Identified in state statute on how that's done.
not specifically, no.
But you probably got something, like your voter to check in, your polling place set up. You've got all of that defined in your elections manual.
Broadly, yes. So there's definitely citations we
So,
can make.
we don't have to put everything from that manual in this, but each one of these boxes, you can identify where it is in the elections manual. And that's when, so if you update the elections manual, okay, well, there's a point in the flow chart that needs to be updated too. And that's why this is what we call continuous process improvement. And so that's what we've done, is we took the 2019 version that you had, and this is what's.
Updated it.
And updated it, and so that's that's an ongoing process when, it's just something you do. I did it when my wife told me I had to start using conditioner in my hair. And I had to use a special facial soap and let the
Okay.
shampoo stay and the conditioner stay in my hair longer. So I had to change the process on how I take a shower.
Yep.
So I look at everything by processes, and that's just because of my background.
Mhm.
So.
So I can definitely work on that.
If we can do a review of, where we have it, if it's something codified in state statute, where in state statute handles voter registration, the ins
Okay.
and outs of it.
Even, yeah, and some of them might be specific, some of them might be a broader
Yeah.
section of the
Yeah.
law, but I can definitely go through, especially on the key points and the ones that have that,
Because
cite those.
Because then, when we get a new elections procedures manual or anything that's changed in state statute, then that makes, what that does then, Jeremy, is makes it easier for the elections department too. And
Mhm.
for us on the EIC to see, okay, this is where those high-level changes were made. And then it makes it easier for you to update your elections manual also.
Mhm.
And training, there might be something that comes out in state statute that specifies how, I don't know, is there anything in there on requirements for training?
There are, so of course, everyone is required, poll workers are required to be trained. There's some dates, when training can start, time limits, when they have to have training, and it's only good for so long. You can't do it once and you're good for 10 years. You have to re-up, that kind of thing. So there are some guidelines in there.
Yeah, so we might want to add in here, just to cover you, the process that the elections department goes through for training election workers. Whether it's for the polling place, tabulation. I looked in a lot of these definitions. So it's something that I've seen. Or what an early board is in the recorder's office. Something we had in duplication, the duplication board.
Those are defined in statute, so those are things that I could
Okay, yeah.
cite.
Yeah, so let's just do the next meeting in September, first week.
Sounds good. The first Friday in September is September 1st. Would that be good? Okay.
And then the EIC is 2 weeks later, so I'd like to keep that 2 week, so. Then I'm foreseeing that for our meeting in September, we just present this whole thing in advance and review it.
Okay.
Hopefully that'll give everybody enough time. Well, we could bring it up and then, use I don't know if there's a decision that has to be made on that or not, I'll leave that up to the chair, but this is something that the EIC wants to approve. I think it should be. This is something that we would need to use, and this is how we, view how elections are ran in Pima County, so.
Okay.
Because I know when I have questions, or people ask me questions, I'm gonna refer to this flow chart. And what about this and what about that? Just as we continue through, this is something that, for me, I'll be using all the time.
Okay, and I will, I'll add page numbers and add the statutory references
Yeah.
to this.
And if it's not in the statute,
If it's in the
of course,
EPM,
cover it
right.
In your manual for the election department.
I can,
And then I'll bring up in a couple of weeks, maybe if the recorder would like to, something in the registration and the voter cleanup rules.
okay.
I got a lot of questions on that.
Even if it's not, I mean, they might be able to provide something, probably not in flowchart form like this, but something to be added to it about their
Yeah,
the
'cause
processes.
I look at those first 3 blocks on the overview. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
Register to vote either online, filling out a voter, submitting it to the mailer in person at the recorder's office. Okay, the recorder office verifies voter is eligible to register to vote. How did they do that? You know, I have questions. You know, I had somebody approach me a year ago, this month, and said, hey, Tom, I received 3 voter registration cards for 3 different individuals that have my home as their residence, and I've lived here 22 years, and I have no idea who these people are. How do we clean that up? What's the process of cleaning that up? You know, we've come out, we saw something on the death certificate, so, you know, submit their registration prior, will be registered, eligible for vote in that election. Okay, so, you know, just in the whole registration and voter rolls, it's how they're added in, and then there's another thing, there's the point, if you go back and read through the contract, that run-back equipment, where they're doing the sorting, is gonna update the voter rolls. So, that person voted. Now, that means you got some new technology, you're connecting to the voter the voter database. And, you know, those are just questions I'm gonna, you know. So, those kind of things still need to be flushed out for what I would like to see. And, you know, like we said, it all depends on how the recorder feels about it. Okay? Got anything else, Arthur?
None at this time.
Not at this time. Okay.
All right, so it looks like the meeting in August will be canceled. Our next meeting would be September 1st. We'll get that out along with the minutes next week, so.
Okay, and so the big thing right now is in each block, just kind of documenting where it falls under state statute or the Pima County elections manual.
Yeah, so when you say elections manual, the EPM, like the state election
I don't
procedures
know,
manual,
so-
we don't have we have the poll workers training manual that I think you were referencing
Okay.
earlier that's updated.
So you use the, okay, so. you
We
use
follow
the
the EPM
state statute and the Secretary of State's election
procedures manual, correct.
Okay. Yeah, and so that's gonna be updated, so, you know, if and when that gets approved, the new one that's being generated right now, we could have substantial changes to this that we're gonna have to flush out.
There could be. I don't anticipate a whole lot, but there are, of course, possibilities with some of them that we would need to change, so.
Okay. Motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
I second, let's go.
All right.
Appreciate it.